Hello and welcome to the Masterclass Theatre. You're all doing very well. We're on day 3. We're halfway through it. You're still here listening to some fantastic presentations, which we are very grateful for. Well, of course, the road to zero emissions is a long, winding and challenging one, but it's a destination that will have to be reached eventually. So, are you sure you've got everything in place in the decision-making process? What is the thought process when choosing a technology? And what are the pros and cons of those competing technologies? Well, they're up for discussion during this session as we hear from David York. He's the Director of Future Zero Emissions Limited. Now, his zero emission experience started in 2009 when he worked for a London bus operator managing the introduction of hydrogen fuel cells on buses. Alongside his experience in hydrogen vehicles, David is also a leading authority on other low and zero emission technologies and their operations. So please make him feel very welcome, David York.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming along. So, my name is David York. I'm going to stand here for around 20 minutes, and then hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end. And I just wanted to kind of run through some things. I'm going to pose a lot of things. And the first question is, are we nearly there yet? We come to shows like this, and you know, there's lots of zero-emission vehicles, lots of charging infrastructure and everything looks really good. And we see in the press, there's lots of good press about zero-emission vehicles being introduced and everything else, and we think, we're doing really well. And actually, we are doing really well. I'm sorry about the formatting on this slide. It's gone a bit haywire, but it doesn't matter too much because I got this information about the EU and zero-emission buses that have been registered in 2023, and it was only just over about 16% were zero-emission buses, and that kind of staggered me. And then listening to the Minister this morning and looking up other details, UK has about 60% of vehicles were zero-emission registered in the UK. But that means there's still 40% in the UK. There's still lots of diesel buses getting registered everywhere. So we do have a long way to go. I think in the UK there's about 35,000 buses-ish in circulation, and we've got around 4,000 buses-ish that are zero emission. So really, we're just skimming the surface. But to say that in the heavy-duty sector, the bus industry is well ahead of everybody else as well. So we are doing very, very well, but there is a long way to go. So just to sort of make sure we know what we're talking about, and I'm sure you all do, but it's always worth reiterating, we had diesel hybrid vehicles where we had a series vehicle, we had a prime mover, we had some controlling software and inverters, etc. We had some energy storage system, that is normally batteries. It can be other things, but it is normally batteries nowadays. And then we have a motor generator. When we come into zero emission and the battery electric, what we do, our prime mover, is we basically plug the vehicle in the wall. We charge it up and we run it till that charge has gone. All sounds very simple, sounds the same as your mobile phone that everybody's used to and everything else, and it sounds very good. Fuel cell, probably a lot of people have heard about fuel cell, not many, it's very close to my heart. A lot of people maybe don't understand what fuel cell is, but basically a fuel cell takes hydrogen and oxygen from the air, produces electricity, and then runs the bus. But the fundamental architecture of the bus is the same, so it is an electric bus. It's just that we're producing the electricity on board and rather than plugging it in the wall. So there are big advantages to that. And then sometimes we've heard, and particularly for the coach area, I think hydrogen internal combustion engine could be a thing. I don't think for city bus there will be internal combustion engine. From my personal point of view, I don't see the point. We're doing very well with battery electric and we've got hydrogen fuel cell. Why do we need another sort of zero emission type? And we can argue whether ICEs are zero emission, but why do we need another zero emission type driveline in there? So that's the sort of drive lines. And then we come to the question of which technology, and I might start getting a little bit controversial here, but that's probably quite good. So battery electric technology, we always hear it's got high efficiency. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. We always hear it's got low maintenance costs, and then we also hear about low infrastructure cost with it. With both the hydrogen fuel cell and the battery electric, we have a zero emission, we have electric driveline, and we have low noise. They're the same. But with hydrogen fuel cell buses, we've got fast refueling, we've got a longer range, and we've got a drop-in replacement for a diesel. Having said that, there are other things that we need to consider in this, because actually what we're doing is we're running buses, and we've got to think about the depot. What about our space in the depot? What about our movement around the depot? What about first in, first out? Do you need to worry about that? There are lots of other things about running a bus other than these kind of pure kind of technical things. And then just moving on a bit from that, just talking about this sort of high efficiency. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that on the next slide. So we'll move that to one side for a second. But the low maintenance cost. Now, yes, there is a lower maintenance cost, but we haven't really got through a full cycle of a battery electric vehicle at the moment. So do we really know that? A bus in the UK, roughly 15, maybe 20 years life, something like that. There's no electric bus, as far as I'm aware, that's run for 15 years or whatever. So can we really stand here and say that it's a low maintenance cost? There are lots of elements to it that are lower in the start of it, but once you start changing batteries and things like that, you do have a lot more in there that you've got to think about. And then the other one is the low infrastructure cost. Now, infrastructure for battery electric gets more and more difficult the more and more vehicles you've got. As I was saying, we've kind of got doing very well. There's some very good projects, and I'm not criticising anyone and everything, but it gets harder and harder as we go along. And the one thing that actually does add a lot of cost is the very thing that you need that's absolutely vital is the power. We need to get power to the depot. And if we're paying for that, then that adds cost on that you're possibly not expecting. And it's extremely expensive to get the power to the depot. And then, like I say, some of the soft things, if you've got to change your operation in the depot, that can add a cost. Anything you do is fundamentally cost. If you're using up space with charging infrastructure, that's cost because you can't park a bus there anymore. And most bus depots that I know are absolutely full to the brim. So you haven't got any space to waste in that. It's all sort of there. As I said, zero emission, they're both electric drive, they're both low noise. Hydrogen fuel cell does have fast refueling. It's not as fast as diesel, but it's an awful lot quicker than battery electric. We've got a long range on the vehicle. So the range is generally longer than a battery electric vehicle. It's not as long as the range that you've got on a diesel vehicle. That's true to say. And I've said at the bottom that's a drop-in replacement for a diesel. Maybe that green tick is a little bit cheeky. It might be more of an orange there, but it is more analogous to a diesel vehicle, i.e. for a sort of city bus service, the bus goes out in the morning, comes back in the evening, fueled, cleaned, parked, and off it goes again. So that's kind of analogous to a diesel vehicle. So there are sort of advantages. Now, when you're making your choice of what you're going to go for, you've got to think about it from the start, from the operation. What are you actually doing? At the end of the day, what are we doing as bus operators? We're moving people. That's what our job is. The actual driveline of how we're doing that is fundamentally irrelevant to our job. Our job is moving people. And that's where we've got to start when we think about which technology to use, because I think sometimes we start at the wrong end of where we are, and we think about the technology first. The big one is power available, because what we need to think about is nowadays a bus and a coach, or a zero-emission bus and a coach, is actually an energy unit. It always ever has been, but with diesel, we can have a big enough diesel tank, we can do what we like with it, and it will work the day. It will do the job for us, and we can refuel it quickly. It's absolutely fine. We can put on CCTV, we can do this, we can do that, we can have heating, we can do everything we want. We just can have a slightly bigger diesel tank. Works really well. The problem is, with a zero-emission bus, we've got a more finite amount of power there. But power as well, I say, is power available. We hear a lot about sort of fast charging. Oh, fast charging, that's it. That's the solution to battery electric. You don't need fuel cell anymore because we've got fast charging and everything else. My argument is you've still got one fundamental problem. If you've got a megawatt charger, a 5 megawatt charger, or anything else, you still need that power to get to the charging unit. And that is the biggest stumbling block at the moment with battery electric. And that's getting harder and harder and harder. When you come back to our job is to actually run a vehicle and move people, that is what we need to think about the most. You know, are we doing what we want to do? So we need to think, I've said 10 years plus, actually we need to think for 15 years plus, because the decisions we make today are actually impacted of what we do in many, many years' time. And when we set up these projects and these nice new projects, we look at things and we think, you know, it's lovely, it's all shiny, we might have a nice opening with people coming down, have the press there, all fantastic stuff, but things actually work really well the first day. It's in 10 years' time, when you're there, it's a rainy Sunday night, hardly anyone's at the depot, you're on the skeleton staff because it's Sunday night. That's what you've got to think about. What am I going to do then? Because we're in the bus world, things do go wrong, and we've got to accept that. So we need to plan for that today when we're deciding what we're going to do, not just about the opening that's in a year's time or something. And then the final question, and it comes back to what are we doing, but what are we trying to achieve with our zero emission? Because to be quite honest, if we just got people on buses, more people on buses, less cars, we help with the climate change situation. So buses are vital for anything. Coaches are vital for that same thing. If we can get more people onto these modes of transport, doesn't matter if we're using Euro 6, it's still a good option for the bus industry, for zero emissions and everything else in a global scale. But are we just looking for zero tailpipe emissions? That's fine, because we've got to think of air quality as well. In cities, we want our air quality to be better. So if we can do that, that's a good objective. And some cities, that's what their aim is. It's less of the kind of zero emissions and the carbon thing, because really the carbon side of things is a global thing. The zero emissions is quite a local thing, so we need to think about that. But also, are we thinking that we're talking about well-to-wheel emissions? Because the one thing that does frustrate me quite a lot, because I'm all for zero emission, I'm actually relatively agnostic about the technology, but I want the right technology. But what really annoys me when fuel cells mentioned all the time, first thing people say is it green hydrogen? That's the first thing they say. I've never heard anyone say, when you say, got a battery electric vehicle, say, is it green electricity? No one said that. And that's very frustrating, because at the end of the day, and this comes on to the efficiency thing, what we've got in the picture, just a little side sort of issue, is a Canadian flag. This is taken in Worthing. I come from nearby. And this is in Worthing, and on Remembrance Week, it's probably quite good. It's a memorial to the Dunkirk raid of 1942, which is kind of made slightly famous by it was the start of Ian Fleming because he started the 30 Assault Commando to get information from the Germans, and the commando unit was there just to raid and get information. But the Canadian troops were posted down the south coast near Worthing, Lancing, where I come from, and that. So it's a little memorial. But in the background, you'll see that there's some wind turbines. Okay? So I'm looking at these wind turbines. Sorry about the poor pictures, but it was just taken by myself. So the wind turbines are there. Now, we go past these turbines, and half of them aren't moving most of the time. So we talk about efficiency and efficiency of the driveline and everything else. But the thing about electricity is basically you have to generate it and use it at the same time. And when this efficiency thing has come on, saying why have fuel cell because it uses, electrolyzers 60%, a fuel cell 60%, so we're losing 70%, blah, 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 and all this. We hear this, and I accept that. That's a very true argument. But what is missing in that argument, and has always been missing, is that hydrogen is an energy carrier. So we're storing energy. So if we turn these things when they're not required, because we sometimes pay these people to turn them off. I mean, it's ridiculous. If we turn these, produce hydrogen, we're actually getting free hydrogen. If you're getting something free, do you care how efficient that is? It's free anyway. So you might as well do it. And so we've got this kind of storage. And if you want 100% green electricity, you're talking really solar and wind. Well, when do we charge? At night. There's no solar at night. What if it's not windy? We've got to have some storage in there. So, to get a well-to-wheel, zero emission, you need to think about these things. So I think this kind of efficiency question is a lot more difficult. Is it efficient to have one of these not turning? No. It's all part of the efficiency. So then coming on to the maintenance. So we're having a lot of different things about maintenance, and I'm not saying any one is right or wrong, but again, we need to think about this fairly early on. So what happens a lot with diesel vehicles is we do in-house maintenance. We're used to doing it. We know what it is. It's very good. A diesel vehicle, people listen for the thing coming in, oh, it's the so-and-so, and off they go and fix it. Brilliant technicians and everything else. So we can do that. The problem is it's a steep learning curve. The very good side of doing it all yourself still is actually you have complete control. And as bus operators, I believe we like control because there's a lot of regulation around us about what we're doing, and it's nice to have control. You're hearing a lot now, a lot more than we used to, of people outsourcing all maintenance. That's great because as a bus operator, you're getting all this new technology, but you don't have to worry too much about the actual maintenance of it because someone else is doing it. So it's not really a problem. However, you do lose a lot of control, and I would argue that actually even if you're outsourcing all your maintenance, you still need to understand your maintenance because you need to understand that what the people that you're outsourcing it to know what they're doing and make sure they're looking after your buses in the way that you want, because you're relying on somebody else for your business, and your business is moving people. If you're not moving people, you're not making money, and that's very important. What's happening as well, you can outsource like the new bits, the fuel cell, the battery system, the hybrid system, or whatever. You can outsource that. Again, you lose some control on this, not all control, but we know how to do our brakes and our steering and everything else, so we might as well do that. We can deal with the doors and everything else. Because at the end of the day, these things are still buses. We know what goes wrong. You've still got to change the tyres. You've still got to do everything else. You get punctures with them. It's just the same. So you lose some control. But what's coming about a lot now is the as-a-service model, and you'll see that around. Now, this is a very nice model. Again, none of these options I'm criticising. I'm just bringing them out. Is that we can sort of lose a lot of our worry and stress about the battery, because there's people that will look after the batteries for you. They will take them off you. They will change them and everything else. So it's a nice easy thing that we can do. But again, we still, do we know what they're doing? Are we in full control of what we're doing? Because again, our operation is moving these people backwards and forwards. So there's different options. And then we need to think about our workshop, because most of our workshops are built for diesel, and our depots are built for diesel. Most of us, or it's going to be very rare, I think, in the UK that we're going to get too many brand new depots where we can start with a blank sheet and everything else. We're converting what we've got. And some of these depots, are converted from old tram depots from before. So it's another iteration of conversion. So we need to think about sort of that sort of thing. So we need to think about what adaptations we need in our depot. And certainly in our workshop, do we need any adaptations? Certainly if you're using a hydrogen fuel cell and you're maintaining them in the workshop, we do need some adaptations, because we have another hazard on our hands. We've got hydrogen. It's a hazard, but we have to deal with that. We need to think about our PPE that we're wearing, because things might change with our PPE. We need to think about training. Who do we need to train? How do we train them? Where do we get that training from? Who can do the training? And then I've put it at the end, but really it should go at the beginning, because we need to think more about safety. Safety is obviously vital. We all think about safety and we're all very good on safety. But safety is a very important part of the whole system, and we need to think about doing risk assessments and everything else. And just one thing about the risk assessments is that you have to do a risk assessment, and one thing that it says when someone that does a risk assessment has to be someone with reasonable knowledge of doing that risk assessment. Well, if you're getting a new vehicle and you've never dealt with this driveline, do you have the reasonable knowledge to actually do the risk assessment? Do you know what risks could be there? So just a quick note on coaches, because I've kind of done more on kind of angle towards city bus than coach, but just coaches as a slide in particular. The main thing to say is the coach, in my opinion, is not a bus, okay? It has a very different duty cycle to a bus, does a very different job. It has to carry luggage, and it does very different things. So actually, it's more analogous to a truck as far as the driveline is concerned, than it is to a city bus. This has been a bit of a problem, because funding has been very difficult for coach, because a lot of bus funding doesn't spread to coaches, and then if you look at truck funding, it doesn't spread to coaches. So they've been kind of left in the middle in sort of no man's land without anything to sort of do and that. And so it's been very difficult for coaches. But the main thing to say is, because it's worked on a bus doesn't mean to say it's going to work on a coach. And I know all the arguments again and that, but I think hydrogen fuel cell and hydrogen potentially ICE coming from the truck side of things could become what is the more normal zero-emission driveline on the coach, is my opinion. I still think city buses do need some hydrogen fuel cell buses. I think that percentage is the argumentative point, but that's my position. Then I'm just got another couple of slides to go, but I'm just going to give you some sort of final points. So I don't normally have notes, but I've got a lot of statistics, and I'm not going to bore you with statistics. But I just looked up some health and safety executive data. 32% of RIDDOR cases are slips, trips and falls, okay? 32%, and the next one down is actually 17% is lifting and carrying. Well, in our workshop, we'll be very aware that we're using a lot of heavy stuff and we have the equipment to deal with that. So we're very aware of the 17%. But how many of you go to depots, we see the electric buses, and for some reason, we're tolerating this everywhere? One of our biggest safety things is slips, trips and falls. But for some reason, we're just ignoring this. Some depots have hundreds of chargers. The other thing is, when are they charging? At night. It's dark. You can't see it. This actually has a yellow cable, a yellow covering on the cable, but most cables are black. That's another thing I can say. But isn't it, to me, it's strange. Why are we tolerating this when we're going forward? It's a day-to-day thing. In 10 years' time, we've got all these cables, hundreds of cables all across the floor. It's quite a thought. But just coming back and it's very important, 50% of fatalities, this is from the HSE website, 50% of fatalities are falls from height, okay? Now, again, in our workshop, just to say that's 50% of the fatalities, around 25% of the fatalities are struck by moving vehicles. Well, all of us are used to, if we're going to work, a depot, we get a high-vis out and that. We go down the walkway. That's all pretty well covered, I would say, in bus depots. You can, we spend a lot of time. But the falls from height, there's a lot of equipment, especially on single-deck vehicles, that's high up that we have to maintain. And if we're doing 28-day inspections and that, we've got to do that. So, pay attention to that. But finally, we hear a lot about opportunity charging. Now, this is a terrible, terrible picture because I was in, it's a bit dodgy, a bloke wearing a suit looking at charging and taking pictures of the kids. But our charging infrastructure, if we got it on the street, it's prone to anything. This is just a kid climbing on it, but what else could happen in the middle of the night and everything else? So coming back to our sort of question, are we nearly there yet? We're making very good strides. We have hydrogen fuel cell buses. We have battery electric buses. We have coaches are coming along. They're following on, and I think they'll come. But all I'm saying is there's an awful long way to go. And so just to finish off, I'm passionate about zero emission. That's why I'm here. I started the company Future Zero Emission to assist in this journey. So it's not about the big things. We want to buy a bus, we can look at buses, etc., etc. It's not about those things. It's about all the little things that we need to make sure that we get right for the future, because the future is going to be zero emission, whether we like it or not, and we just have to prepare and be aware of it and move forward together. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, David. Yeah, you're right there. It's the future, whether you like it or not, and obviously from what we've heard there, I think we're going to be going for a mixed economy right through. I don't think it'll ever be one technology over another. Each have got pros and cons. Thanks very much indeed for your time, David. We've run out of time on this session now, so we're going to have to move on, but thank you very much for coming to join us today.
Yeah, I'll be around if anybody's got any questions on that.
Lovely. Yeah, if you want to approach him. The next session here is at 12:35, and we're going to be continuing looking at future technologies in that, and an electrification project that went on in Kent. So we'll see you at 12:35 for that. Thank you.